Part 1. The Fury of the Flood. The seven-seater SUV shuddered violently, not from the engine, but from the force of the water. Just minutes ago, this was a peaceful country road in New Mexico, where Jacob's family was enjoying the first day of their vacation. Now, it had transformed into a ferocious, murky brown river, roaring as it tried to swallow them whole. The water had already risen past the halfway point of the tires, then quickly crept up to the windows. The sound of rain pounding on the roof was like the relentless beat of a war drum. Inside, the air was thick with fear. "Daddy!" Sam, the youngest son at 6 years old, wailed, his small face pale with terror. He clung tightly to his sister's arm. "It's okay, Sam," said Leah, his 14-year-old sister, trying to sound brave, even as her own lips trembled. She held him close, turning his face into her chest so he wouldn't have to see the terrifying scene outside. "Let's play a game. We're in a submarine, okay? Just close your eyes." In the front seat, Sarah, the mother, had her eyes squeezed shut, her hands clasped together, her lips murmuring silent prayers. "Oh God, please save my family. Please protect my children." Her tears mixed with the raindrops that had begun to seep through the door seals. Jacob, the father, was the only one not crying. He clenched his jaw, his hands gripping the steering wheel, as if he could fight back the entire river with his own strength. The SUV began to be pushed sideways by the current, slamming into a floating log with a sickening crunch. "Jacob, we're being carried away!" Sarah screamed, her eyes flying open. "I know!" Jacob roared, helplessness creeping into his usually calm voice. "Everyone, stay calm. Keep your seatbelts on. Don't panic." He tried to honk the horn, but the electrical system flickered and died. The car plunged into darkness, lit only by the faint flashes of lightning in the sky. Water began to pour onto the floor, cold and filthy. Sam's cries grew louder. A desperate silence fell over them. They were trapped, an iron cage in a rushing torrent. Jacob slammed his fist against the steering wheel, a furious shout escaping his chest. But then, amidst the screaming rain and the roaring water, Leah froze. "Dad, do you hear that?" Jacob held his breath, straining to listen. She was right. Another sound. It wasn't nature. It was human. A faint, distant, but definite call. "Over there!" he yelled, pointing toward a small hill not far away. The whole family squinted through the thick curtain of rain. At the top of the hill, a weak, yellow flashlight beam was cutting back and forth. And they saw them. Two small figures, an elderly man and woman, both in raincoats, trying to make their way toward the edge of the woods where the water wasn't as deep. The man was waving his arms and shouting something they couldn't make out. They weren't alone. In the middle of nature's fury, an old couple was trying to come to their rescue. Part 2. The Lifeline and the Tragedy. The New Mexico sky was unusually blue, without a single cloud. Honey-colored sunlight stretched across the straight highways that cut through the majestic red rock desert. Inside the seven-seater SUV, the air was filled with joy and laughter. This was the first day of the summer vacation Jacob's family had been looking forward to all year. In the back seat, 6-year-old Sam pressed his face against the glass, his eyes wide as he watched the cacti blur past. "Dad, do zebras live here?" he asked with innocent curiosity. Leah, his 14-year-old sister, had headphones on, but couldn't help but laugh. "Silly, this is the desert, not Africa," she teased her brother. "But I saw one with stripes," Sam argued. In the front, Jacob and Sarah glanced at each other in the rearview mirror and smiled. "Maybe it was a horse someone painted, buddy," Jacob said, his hands steady on the wheel but his face completely relaxed. Sarah, his wife, reached over and took his other hand. "Thank you for this trip, Jacob," she said softly, her eyes full of happiness. "It's been so long since we've had a real family vacation." "Everything's going to be fine, you see," Jacob replied, squeezing her hand gently. "My new job is good. We'll be back on our feet soon." The radio played a cheerful country song. In the back, Sam and Leah started to sing along, off-key but full of enthusiasm. Jacob and Sarah laughed again. In that moment, their car was like an oasis of happiness, a perfect little world rolling through the vast wilderness. It felt as if nothing on earth could break their peace. But nature always has its own plans. As the car turned onto a smaller, more remote country road leading to the lodge they had booked, the sky began to change. On the horizon, behind the Red Rock Mountains, a few gray streaks of cloud began to gather, like ink blots spreading on a blue canvas. "Looks like rain," Sarah said, looking up with a hint of concern. "Probably just a passing shower," Jacob reassured her, his hands still firm on the wheel. "The weather changes fast out here. A little rain to cool things off wouldn't be so bad." The first few drops splattered against the windshield. Then, quickly, it became a heavy downpour. The sky went from blue to a grim gray in minutes. The red dirt road began to turn slick. Jacob slowed down, turning the wipers to their highest setting. "Whoa, a bit heavier than I thought," he said, his relaxed smile fading. Up ahead, the road dipped into a low-lying area where a usually dry creek bed ran. Jacob stopped the car. "It's just a puddle," he told himself and his family. "The water's not that deep. We have high clearance. We can make it." "Maybe we should turn back, Jacob?" Sarah suggested nervously. "It's fine, honey. Turning back would take way longer. I'll just go slow." Jacob shifted into gear, gently pressed the gas, and eased the SUV into the water. The moment the front tires hit the current, he knew something was wrong. The force of the water was much stronger than he had anticipated. The car began to sway. "Dad!" Leah screamed from the back. Jacob tried to accelerate through it, but it was too late. The ferocious current had bitten down on the vehicle. The engine sputtered a few times and then died. The SUV, now just a lifeless metal box, began to float sideways, carried away by the water. A horrifying silence filled the car. The cheerful country music was gone. All that remained was the sound of rain drumming on the roof and the roar of the flood. The smiles had vanished, replaced by four faces pale with fear. Outside, the water had risen past the halfway point of the tires, then quickly crept up to the windows. Their trip to paradise had, in an instant, turned into a battle with hell. The vehicle, now a soulless iron island, began to drift terrifyingly. It slammed into a floating log with a deafening crunch, causing the whole family to scream in terror. Jacob tried to restart the car, but it was useless. The dashboard flickered one last time and then went dark, plunging them into near total blackness, torn only by the cold flashes of lightning. Water began to seep through the door seals, chillingly cold. "Are we going to die here?" Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. Jacob didn't answer. He was asking himself the same question. He looked at his two trembling children in the back seat, and a feeling of utter powerlessness squeezed his heart. He let out a desperate cry, but his shout was swallowed by the storm. Hope seemed to be extinguished. But then, in the darkness and despair, Leah, his oldest, suddenly cried out, "Dad, look!" A pinprick of light, the faint beam of a flashlight from the opposite hill, wasn't just a speck of light. It was an extraordinary confirmation that in the midst of nature's fury, they were not alone. For the four people trapped in the iron cage, where life was being measured by every rising inch of water, it was a universe of hope. Jacob stared at it, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm that matched the screaming rain outside. On the small hill, Elias gripped the storm lantern in a hand calloused by 70 years of working the earth and gravel. The wind whipped his raincoat, making it flap like a sail, about to be torn apart at sea. The freezing air carried the smell of mud and...
"Great! Tie it to something sturdy. Now send the little one over first," Elias commanded. A breathtaking rescue, a battle for life against death, began. Jacob struggled to tie the rope securely to the seat frame. He turned back, grabbed Sam, his youngest son, who was sobbing with fear. "It's okay, son. Dad's going to get you across. You're my brave boy, remember? Close your eyes and hold tight to the rope." He kissed his son's forehead, then pushed him out the window and into the raging current. Sarah let out a horrified scream. On the other side, Elias braced himself, the muscles in his old arms bulging. He pulled. Inch by inch, Sam's small body was dragged through the water, lifted up, and then plunged down by the fierce waves. Those few seconds felt like an eternity. Finally, the boy was pulled into the shallower water. Mariah, who had run out at some point, rushed to grab him, hugging his trembling, blue-lipped body to her chest. One was safe. Next was Leah. The 14-year-old was braver. "Be careful, Dad," she said, then gripped the rope. Leah's journey was just as perilous, but she too made it to the other side safely. Two were safe. Only Sarah and Jacob were left. "Your turn, Sarah, hurry," Jacob urged. "No, I'm not going without you," Sarah cried, clinging to the seat. "Go, for the kids. I'm right behind you, I promise." Sarah bit her lip, looked at her frightened children on the bank, then at her husband. She grabbed the rope. As she neared the bank, she looked back at her husband. Jacob had tied the rope around himself and gave her a thumbs up, signaling he was okay. All four of them, mother and children, were on this side. They hugged each other, trembling. They had almost made it. But just then, nature decided to deliver its final blow. An earth-shattering crack echoed from upstream. A large section of an old barn, eroded by the floodwaters, had collapsed, sending a massive, rusty tractor tumbling straight toward the SUV. It was like an iron monster hurtling through the night. "Jacob, look out!" Sarah screamed, her voice filled with horror. The tractor slammed into the car with unstoppable force. The vehicle was overturned, the sound of crushing metal screeching horribly. The rope was yanked taut for a moment, then snapped. Jacob, still attached to the rope, was thrown from the mangled car and pulled into the vortex of water and the iron beast. It all happened in a few seconds. An absolute silence suddenly fell. Then, a heart-wrenching, inhuman scream tore from Sarah's chest. "Jacob!" She only had time to see a churning patch of foamy water where her husband had just disappeared. Sarah nearly collapsed, but Elias held her tight. "You have to live, for the children. Let's go, get to the house, now!" For a moment, Sarah's heart felt like it had died. But when she heard her two children crying, a primal strength surged within her. She swallowed her pain, bit her lip until it bled, and let Elias pull her and her children step by agonizing step up the hill toward the small log cabin. When they reached the small log cabin, the three of them were enveloped in a simple but priceless warmth. Mariah, with her kind face and understanding eyes, didn't ask a single question. She acted. She quickly grabbed thick, dry, hand-woven wool blankets and wrapped them tightly around the two children, who were shivering from cold and fear. Elias, exhausted himself,
was already busy tending to the fire. The crackling of dry wood and the flickering flames gradually chased away the chill of the night and the water. Mariah brought out a pot of steaming hot potato and bone soup, the fragrant smell of onion and cilantro filling the air. "Eat up, dears. Get your strength back," she said in a gentle voice. "We don't have much, but this will help." Sarah shook her head, a lump like a stone in her throat, unable to swallow anything. But Mariah had already ladled the soup into 3 old earthenware bowls. She patiently fed Sam small spoonfuls, coaxing him. She handed a bowl to Leah. "Eat, honey. Your brother needs you to be strong. Your mother does too." Leah nodded, tears splashing into her soup as she ate and sobbed. Sarah sat motionless, clutching Sam, who had fallen asleep in her arms from exhaustion. She stared out the window at the rain. The pain of losing her husband was too immense. It wasn't a sudden tidal wave, but a giant glacier, slowly forming and freezing solid in her chest, leaving her unable to cry, unable to breathe. Everything seemed to be over. Once the children were put to bed, the only sounds in the cabin were the subsiding rain and the crackling fire. Sarah still sat there by the window, her eyes staring blankly into the pitch-black night. She tried to picture Jacob's face the last time she saw it, but the image kept blurring in the floodwaters. Mariah quietly approached, placing a warm, wrinkled hand on her shoulder. She said nothing, just a gentle pat, a silence full of understanding. And that was all it took. The glacier in Sarah's heart shattered. She turned, buried her head in the old woman's lap, a complete stranger, and sobbed. She cried like a child who had lost her whole world. She cried for the husband she loved beyond measure, the brave father of her children. She cried for their unfinished plans, for the house they were going to build, for the trips they had promised each other. She cried for the uncertain future of her children. Mariah just held her tightly, stroking her trembling back. She too had lost a husband. She understood this pain, the pain of having half your world suddenly swallowed by darkness. That night, Sarah fell asleep in her arms, a stranger's arms, an unexpected comfort in the storm of her life. Early the next morning, Sarah woke up on the sofa, her body aching. Faint morning light streamed through the cracks in the door. In the first moment of consciousness, she forgot everything. But then, the memory of last night hit her like a knife. Jacob, he was gone. The pain surged again, squeezing her heart. But then, she heard a sound, a clear, joyful, and utterly astonished cry from outside. "Daddy! You're back!" It was Sam's voice. Sarah shot up, her heart pounding like a drum. It can't be. He's dreaming, she told herself. The grief made her think her son was hallucinating from the shock. She was about to run out and hold him, to explain the terrible truth. But then she heard Leah's voice, not a cry, but a shout of pure joy. "Dad! Is that really you? It's really you!" Sarah bolted out the door like a madwoman. She was shoeless, her bare feet hitting the still damp earth. The scene before her was unbelievable. The flood had receded, leaving behind a devastated landscape of mud and broken branches. And coming up from the riverbank, slowly, painfully, were 2 figures. One was Elias, his clothes caked in mud, and the other, limping, clothes torn to shreds, covered in dirt, being supported by the old man, was Jacob, her husband. He was alive. "Jacob! Sarah!" He looked up and saw her. Time seemed to stop. Then they both ran toward each other. Sarah no longer felt tired or sore. She ran faster than she ever had in her life.
She threw herself into his arms, holding him so tight, as if letting go for even a second would make him disappear again. She could feel his body, cold, wet, covered in mud, but impossibly warm. It was the warmth of life. Sam and Leah ran to them, hugging their father's legs, sobbing. "Daddy, I thought you were gone," Sam said through his tears. Jacob knelt, despite the pain, to pull all three of them into his arms. They just stood there, the four of them, a single unit, and cried. Tears of relief, of happiness, of an unbelievable miracle. Elias stood beside them, watching quietly, his kind eyes also welling up. He waited until they had calmed down a little before explaining. "Early this morning, when the water went down, I took the small boat down the river looking for him, holding on to a sliver of hope. Luckily, their family had been miraculously reunited. Amidst the devastation of a natural disaster, on the line between life and death, they had found each other again. And they understood that the greatest treasure wasn't a house or a car, but being with the ones you love, hearing the words Dad and Mom every day.